Some new potential RE4 Remake leaks just surfaced, and they're quite interesting to say the least. So with that being said, let's get right into it. So a few months back, someone sent me a document with a huge list of RE4 Remake leaks that were posted on 4chan. I actually made a video covering these leaks in detail, but I will just be quickly recapping the document in this video, just so everyone is on the same page. Now ever since this person has sent me the document, they have continued to fill me in on supposedly new information about the game. There have been RE4 Remake leaks, Resident Evil 9 leaks, and leaks for the next Resident Evil showcase. Obviously I think it goes without saying, but take all these leaks with a grain of salt, since most of this hasn't been revealed or confirmed by Capcom. There's definitely a lot of leaked information to go over, so let's just get right into it. Firstly, I'm gonna recap the old leaks from the document, which all come from old builds of the game. Because we were discussing old builds, it is very well possible that this list won't entirely reflect on the final product. It starts off by saying that Leon will encounter the Bella sisters during the mine segment of the game, and they will be led by a mutated Dr. Salvador. As for Dr. Salvador, he will be a reoccurring boss up until the mine area. Each time he is defeated, he will mutate further and further, with his final form looking very similar to the chainsaw guy from the Waterworld Mercenaries map. Next up, it states that the Del Lago boss fight plays almost exactly like the original, but in this game, the spears you throw at it are limited. Chief Mendez will play somewhat of a stalker type role, but he really won't appear that often. His home has been expanded upon and he will chase the player throughout it. Mendez will grab nearby enemies and push them towards the player while cursing at them in their native language. And lastly, for Mendez, it states that his final boss fight will be very similar to the original game. From there, it states that there will only be 2 Garradors in the game. They won't die, instead just get knocked out when defeated in each area until the end of the castle segment. U3 has been completely redesigned, and there will be changes to its encounter. It will be very similar to the baby in Resident Evil Village, where the player must solve a small puzzle to escape a very dark area before moving to a bigger space to battle it. The area contains a lot of nitrogen containers to slow it down. Next, it says that 2 El Gigante fights have been completely removed, leaving only 1 in the village. Krauser's design has been completely reimagined. He is now wearing a full black sweater with tactical clothing around him. The Regenerators and Iron Maidens will be much scarier. Instead of having 1 variant each, they will come in 4 or 5 different variants like long, regular, obese, abnormal, etc. Each of these variants will have the parasites controlling their bodies set in different locations. Next up, it states that the Salazar boss fight will be very similar to Moreau's boss fight from Resident Evil 8. The fight will be located in a very large hallway with pillars. Salazar himself will still be protected by his shell until the player defeats his left hand. The Novista doors have been completely cut and the huge Salazar statue remains in the game, but in the remake it's not a statue. Now something I need to mention is that this leaker just recently gave me some new updates and said that the devs did actually decide to bring the Novista doors in the game. He also mentioned that the Novista doors will be very similar to the Chimera from the Resident Evil 1 remake. Now moving on, the next leak states that in the dungeon within the castle, Leon must find a key to unlock the only exit door. The dungeon is pitch black, so the player must rely on a flashlight to look for clues while trying to avoid a new stalker enemy with a long hook. Shining the flashlight at the stalker will cause it to cry and bend down, giving the player a chance to evade. From there, it states that Luis Serra will be a boss fight in the game. He will help Leon and Ashley up until the infection takes over and he mutates uncontrollably. Then it says when playing as Ashley, you will be equipped with a handgun, but a few gameplay mechanics will be different, one of them being that her aim will be very shaky and hard to control. Also, the aim will not include a reticle. It then states that Dr. Salvador will dual wield a pair of chainsaws. Salazar will have a huge pet spider that will include a boss battle where you can either kill it or escape. The laser room will make a return, but it won't be over the top like the original and take a much more serious approach. And lastly, the leaker mentions that Wesker will make an appearance in a helicopter during the game. From there, we move on to the new RE4 Remake details. He starts off by saying the strong reason that the Chainsaw Ganado's head appearance is like that is because his head is actually split into 2, which is causing the parasite to be exposed. And because the Plaga is sensitive to sunlight, the Chainsaw Ganado covers his head with the potato sack. From there, he goes on to say that the rest of the leaks I've shared previously from the early build are still present, but with a few things changed. The Chainsaw Ganado will still mutate as the story progresses. The Resident Evil team has only shown 10% of what what the game has to offer. They are keeping so many contents like the enemy with the hook within the dungeon hidden for now. Ashley with the gun is still playable, but apparently she is not used to guns. That's why she is shaky in her gameplay. The scene with the infected Ashley at the end of the trailer happens in the middle of the game, when Sadler got temporary control of her trying to kill Leon after many failed missions from his followers, but luckily Ashley was ultimately able to resist the plaga and avoid shooting Leon. From there, he says in the beginning cutscene 2 cops were present. When they reach the destination, one of those cops immediately leaves to investigate. After waiting for a while with no response, the other cop goes to explore and tells Leon to wait in the car. Almost 1 hour goes by with no response, causing Leon to get frustrated and leave the car to look for them. He then goes on to say that the cop was actually alive before the Ganados burned him at the village, which tells me that we will probably get some sort of cutscene in the cop's perspective before he dies. Next up, he tells us that the devs decided to switch gears and actually add the Novistadors in the game. Like I mentioned earlier, he did say that they will be similar to the Chimera from the Resident Evil 1 remake. He then says that the Ganados in the island are there, but not too similar from the original or the villager Ganados in the remake. Instead, they are a little more deformed, a bit similar to the Soldats from Resident Evil Village, but not as exaggerated in design. From there, I asked him about this mysterious cloaked enemy with Sadler in the trailer. He replied that the main source did not share anything about it, so it's probably not too important. I then asked him if there are any new characters and new locations. He replied saying, as far as his source knows, most of them are preserved but refined to be better than the original, with a few extended scenarios like the first cabin, Chief Mendez's home, etc. The island is the area that got the most reworked to make it more exciting than both the village and castle sections. His source never saw the island section, but he does know about Krauser. His character got reworked to make more sense for the rebooted storyline. After this, he re-explained that most of these leaks he shared were from older versions, which means that these leaks could have went through a few changes. While he was re-explaining this, he also mentioned that the Garrador models are redesigned, and they will be programmed similar to the propeller enemy from Resident Evil Village. Now from here we move on to the upcoming Resident Evil showcase. He states that RE4 is expected to go gold in 2 to 3 weeks before New Year's Eve, but Capcom usually doesn't announce this to the public. Going gold, for those of you who don't know, is basically a term for a completed project that is ready to be printed. He says although the game was finished around a month ago, user testings are not, and while the game bugs are being fixed, Capcom is confident that they should be ready to print this game in less than a month. From there, he says that the next Resident Evil showcase is scheduled for the first week of March. The development team will most likely announce by around the last week of February. He said he's not sure if they will show anything off at the Game Awards, but the showcase is already planned for the 2nd or 3rd of March. As for the demo, he said most likely March as well. In this last leak for RE4, he states that the devs are currently creating a new production video with Shinji Mikami about the older builds of Resident Evil 4 and how they're bringing some of these ideas in the remake. The leaker didn't mention this, but I'm going to assume that this production video will be shown at the next Resident Evil showcase. Okay, so that was pretty much it for the Resident Evil 4 remake, but like I mentioned earlier, he did mention a few things about Resident Evil 9 as well. He firstly mentions that the recent Resident Evil 9 leaks that appeared a few months ago were completely fake. These fake leaks included a ghost town setting and mythological creatures. He then says that the game has been in development since 2021, but they are still experimenting with the story. The game has no characters or actual settings yet. He then goes over some of the many details he could gather for the game. Resident Evil 9 is most likely to have co-op in the campaign. Single player can happen for sure, but how the player's partner will be handled is quite interesting. In the single player campaign, motion capture will be done for the AI partner like a cutscene, similar to how we see Ada in the RE2 remake, and like the player seeing Mia through Ethan's eyes in Resident Evil 7. This idea is due to their latest RE engine. The two players can be separated and solve their own puzzles, but when it comes to single player, things might change. The leaker then states that the development team is still experimenting on how to have a horror atmosphere and vibe in co-op. According to the dev, Revelations 2 was the closest thing to have when it comes to the horror atmosphere, but they believe they can do much better. Their aim is to have players scared while having fun and being engaged with the story together. The game will be a third-person perspective. The story is still in the constructive phase, but it won't be set anytime after Shadows of Rose, but either a few years before or after Resident Evil 8. The leaker believes that co-op in this project is a test for a possible Resident Evil 5 remake. He then finishes the message by saying we might not see anything for Resident Evil 9 until 2024 or 2025. And there you have it, those were all the new Resident Evil leaks. It's definitely a lot to take in if true, so do be sure to let me know your own thoughts about all this down in the comments below. But anyways, that is going to be it for this video. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.